Good evening. Good evening. My name is Chrissy Thornton, and I'm the president and CEO of Associated Black Charities. Welcome to October's Equity at Work. We are so excited to have you here with us as we discuss how to navigate common issues that Black professionals face in the workplace. The mission of Associated Black Charities is to eliminate structural barriers and to advance long-term solutions that create new opportunities for Black people, Black families, and Black communities to thrive. ABC acknowledges structural racism effect on the racial wealth gap, workplace discrimination, health inequity, disparities in housing, educational inequities, discriminating and dehumanizing laws and policies in our criminal justice system, and more. We use an equity framework as a convener and thought leader to end race-based barriers that impede Black people from having an opportunity to succeed. And that is at the heart of all of our programming. Thank you for joining us tonight. At this time, I would like to welcome you to our Navigating Imposter Syndrome Equity at Work webinar. Imposter syndrome is a formidable adversary for professionals across all walks of life. Yet, for Black professionals, its challenges are often compounded. The workplace, where individuals seek to thrive and contribute their best, can become a battleground for self-doubt and uncertainty. Black professionals often find themselves wrestling with the fear of not measuring up and stereotypes. The weight of this fear can be paralyzing, leading to constant self-evaluation and self-doubt, despite their undeniable competence and accomplishments. This persistent concern of being labeled as an imposter, rather than being recognized for their talents and expertise, can hinder career advancement and personal fulfillment. In the face of these challenges, Black professionals have to develop strategies to navigate this and other complex intersections of race and, in this case, imposter syndrome. So tonight, I would like to introduce you to an esteemed group of ladies who are joining us for our panel, and I'll ask them to join me on screen at this time. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to our Equity at Work webinar. We're so excited to have this discussion. And so I'm going to ask each of you to please just introduce yourselves and share why this discussion around navigating imposter syndrome is so relevant and important today. And we'll start with you, Jessica.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Jessica Williams, and I like to introduce myself as a wife, a mother, a community activist, a musician, a friend, and then I currently reside in Harford County with my family, and I am the senior manager of partnerships for the Greater Baltimore Committee, as well as many other community organizations. I hold some leadership roles there too. So really, really glad to be here today. And why this topic is so important to me is because it's something that I have struggled with pretty much my entire life. Having grown up in majority white spaces, navigating a career in majority white places as well. So I think that this is a really, really important topic for us to kind of tackle and discuss. I find myself even more recently having these conversations with sisters and friends, and just kind of trying to break down these barriers that plague us, like imposter syndrome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we also have with us Dr. Janice Collins. Janice, we'd like to welcome you to the webinar and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why talking about imposter syndrome is important to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Chrissy. It's great to be here with my other esteemed guests as well. So I am a person of intersectionality, and I come to this discussion from a number of different perspectives. So I describe myself as a humanist and an abolitionist. I am an abolitionist in the fact that my purpose from a higher calling is to help set people free so they can reach their optimal performance, results, and purpose in life. I think that each individual has value, And so even as a professor, I look at myself as a facilitator to make sure that my students learn what they need to learn and to protect them to a certain degree so that they can reach their purpose in life, whatever that is and whenever it comes. I think everyone has value. And so I look at that and I deal with that in my pedagogy. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, which will tell you and explain a little bit more how I'm coming to this perspective from many different disciplines. So I have a BA at Wake Forest, from Wake Forest, where I studied speech communications and theater arts. But my concentration was in communication rhetoric. So at a very young age, I started looking at how words were being used for image portrayals, for marginalization, things along those lines. And then I earned an MS in journalism at the Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University, where I looked at image portrayals in the media. And I looked at the roles that journalists and media messengers play. And that was before social media came on the scene. But I was always also looking at social media as well. How are images concocted and how that plays a role in people's identity, which plays a role in self-value, which all goes toward imposter syndrome. And I have a PhD in mass communications, specializing in media management, leadership, and issues of critical cultural theory and demarginalization. Now, during that time, because I've been in television for 37 years and did very well there, and I started teaching higher academia for almost 23 years now, I started to see what we could do about it. What solutions are there that we can enforce in our workplace, in our learning spaces, in our communities and things along those lines. So at that time, around 2003, 2004, I officially started developing critical pedagogy practice and theory called active centralized empowerment. It's a national award winning when it's one of the few ways of addressing learning spaces and working places for full inclusion. Because I'm a student athlete, former student athlete. It's like being on the number one team. If you want to make the top 5, you have to be around the best players. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, and earn that spot. And so when earning that spot, I look at ways that you're not going to give me anything. You really haven't given me anything. I've earned it. But how do I take my place? And when I say me, not personally, how do I take my place authentically, without apology? When I'm actually working, when I'm doing, when I'm in school or things along those lines. I'll say also, I'm a senior research fellow for the STEM Tech Foundation, led by Elle Heron in Seattle, Washington. We're working right now with a wonderful group, Best Start for Kids out of Kings County, with the Liberated Village with Yolanda McGee and Dr. Nikon Pone. I'm also the CEO and the founder of World Changers Media International Foundation, where I go across the world and have little kids learn how to capture and own their voice in media and storytelling. And I'm also the president of Acing It Consulting, which it centers around this active centralized empowerment. So this goes right to the heart of what I think as a humanist can determine and needs to be talked about in order to not only individuals reach their optimal performance, but so by doing so, they're allowed to create and invent new things to help other people. They work to help other individuals within their communities across the country, but being the best that they can be, which means that the environment can be more equitable to a certain degree. But the main thing, I'll stop at this, the main thing that I look at is empowerment. Because when it really comes down to it, from my perspective, it's about power. It's about being empowered and who has the power. And how do you capture your own power in a particular way?
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins.
Sure.
We appreciate it and so grateful to have you with us tonight. Now we'll turn it over to Amber Austin Briggs. Amber, please tell the audience tonight a little bit about yourself and why this topic is important.
Well, thank you, Chrissy, for having me, and thank you to the Dr. Collins and Jessica. Dr. Collins, you were dropping gems. I just have to say that I was very much so like, yes, 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 over here, even though you couldn't hear me. But something that you had touched on was unapologetic and authenticity. And those were two of the major words that really stuck out to me. So like Chrissy said, my name is Amber Austin Briggs, and I come to this space as the founder and CEO of AC Briggs Consulting, where our mission is to increase the number of Black professionals in executive leadership positionings and executive leadership and upper management positions through coaching, special programming, and events. I am a duly certified leadership coach as recognized as the International Federation of Coaches. And that is how this organization came to be, because I realized that in my background, so my formal background, I have a master's in education from Hopkins in undergrad, a BA in developmental psychology. So my entire career has been about children. So working in adult spaces, realizing that there's this disconnect between what our kids believe and how they show up authentically as adults. And my niche is middle school. So people are like, how do you like middle school? Those are my people. Love middle school. That's my age group. And I realized being in middle school, working with middle schoolers, our kids do not have the audacity to dream. They don't have the audacity to dream big at all. And this is where the imposter syndrome comes in, of even talking to teenagers, that they don't believe that they can do it, that they don't feel like they have the skills or the resources or even the support and the love to be able to be successful. And when I founded this organization, I really had those kids in mind of how can we close the gap of not just giving them the goal of I'm going to graduate high school, but I'm going to be that CEO. I am going to be that upper management professional. I'm going to work for Amazon, not in the stock room, but I'm going to be the senior accountant, right? And so I noticed that a lot of the things that I do, I function in the space of my kids. And though a lot of my kids are grown by now, still thinking about when they were in the 6th grade, when they were in the 5th grade, when they were in the 4th grade, and how they have transformed, and how professional development is considered a luxury when in actuality it's a necessity.
Thank you so much, Amber. So let's get right into the conversation. I am so excited to talk about this and have been looking forward to this webinar, because as someone who's new in a leadership role in the greater Baltimore region with Associated Black Charities, I frequently have found myself during the course of this year verbally saying I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. And as much as I feel like it's self-imposed, it is something I've kind of leaned on, and I'll talk about my lived experience in a little bit. But if we were to define it, if we were to define what imposter syndrome is, how would we define that for tonight's discussion? I mean, I have a little bit of research, but how would you define what imposter syndrome is and how it shows up for people? Anyone?
Well, I would say that taking from the standard traditional understanding and definition of imposter syndrome, I would add and extend that in the fact that from an acing point of view, where active centralized empowerment literally means you actively centralize yourself on what's authentic about you. That's cross-cultural competency, that's where you come from, whatever the case may be, and that is your value. And it should have value. And so I tell individuals, it's not what you've been through, but what you've come through. That's empowering. And you look at the end, and so if, for instance, in my classrooms, when I have individuals who may come from the lower end of the socioeconomic, I tell them you will make a great treasurer. Why? Because you'll make sure we never run out of money. So that's empowering. So what I look at it as, I believe the imposter syndrome, and I see and I deal with a lot of individuals where it is, they feel that they're doing it to themselves, but they have to understand that they were conditioned a lot of times to do it to themselves. They were, it was imposed on them from somewhere in their life, because usually there are 3 to 5 layers of self. And if we're not careful from the very beginning, when a child is dreaming, right, and they know exactly what they want to be, it's at that time we need to protect them, because if not, they'll start getting rewarded for things they're not or they don't want to do, and then they don't know how to get out of this conundrum. The other aspect is whether, and what I've seen in Black and white communities will say that for now, that the imposter syndrome is enacted upon people of both races. Black people can do it to Black people, white people do it to Black people, whatever the case may be. So it's cultivated society. When you think about society, it's cultivated in a certain way. And the reason why they talk about it usually hits high achieving individuals, especially for this sake of this conversation, Black individuals, is because they're the most threatening. They're
Wow.
the most threatening to the status quo of racial oppression. And so it is those who can do the most harm, who can do the most good, that actually start to feel it if they're not covered in some kind of way. So I look at it as something that we can overcome by not looking at necessarily and paying attention to what other people are doing to us, because I look at Cooley's Looking Glass Self that takes a mirror and says, the way we normally communicate is, Chrissy, sometimes you're just an angry Black woman. And I'm putting that mirror up to you and you're looking at that. What you have to do when you talk about navigating imposter syndrome, you then have to navigate how I see you. That's how we're putting in a position. You have to navigate and say, I have to either prove that I'm not. That means that you're not normal, because everyone could get angry. So we put that on us ourselves. And then we have to say, or I'm just going to try to, whatever I do, I'm going to try to navigate around it. Well, what that does is it gives that person power over you, where I'm like, you're already validating them. And what I say in active centralized empowerment is you turn that mirror around and let them see that I see you as an angry Black woman because of my own insecurities. I see you as an angry Black woman because of the racist ways I've been brought up. On the back of the mirror is what you write. You're passionate. You are angry sometimes because you should be angry. And so therefore, that's what I mean without apology. We don't have to be mean about it, but we can be ourselves, because that's the only way you can really truly raise self-esteem and self-confidence. And I'm not going to go into the whole research, but as a researcher and scholar of a mixed methodology, everything that I research, I put into practice. And I test it to see whether or not it can raise self-esteem, hold it, and self-confidence. And what I found by being authentically who you are, which means you take the bumps and the bruises, that's where you can raise your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and sustain it for a period of time. So that's what I would add to the imposter syndrome. I think it's their problem and not ours necessarily. It becomes our problem because we haven't come up with the systems. As I say in my book, 250 years is still a slave. The system was not meant for your happiness in a capitalistic society. It was meant for you to make money for a capitalistic society. We have to find our own way of finding our own peace and our own core of success as we mitigate and navigate our own living situations.
Absolutely. And somebody dropped the title of the book in the chat, because I just wrote it down too,
Cool.
so that we can make sure that we tap into that. So Jessica, we basic definition, self-doubt, right? Feeling like you have not earned positions and that you're not being recognized for your achievements. How would you define imposter syndrome? You said you felt like you've experienced it. What does it mean to you?
I felt like I've experienced it. I feel like I'm experiencing it now. There's all of these things, right? But what I really truly believe that imposter syndrome is feeling like a fraud, knowing that you're competent, right? Knowing that you've done all of the things to prepare you for the moment, but still getting in that moment and feeling like at any moment they're going to see me for who I truly am, almost like the Wizard of Oz, right? Like the veil will be lifted and you will see me standing here, failing to realize that, again, you are completely competent and very prepared for the moment, but feeling like the great and powerful Oz behind the veil.
Absolutely. And Amber, we talked about in a previous webinar how Black people and Black workers sometimes feel that pressure. We're taught that we have to be twice as good. So how does this perfectionism show up in our embracing imposter syndrome?
I was actually going to use the language of superhuman, right? I would even argue that the most impacted intersectionality and sub-demographic of Black people is Black women, having to wear this cape and oftentimes not recognized for it, or even vice versa, having this superhuman ability and having to feel like we must exceed this superhuman ability, no matter the amount of support that we have in the world, no matter the support that our families give us or we have in the professional space. It's like there is this expectation that we are to be above and beyond, right? And I think my definition of imposter syndrome would be just that, the feeling of inadequacy when we have exceeded those expectations, when we have exceeded not necessarily perfectionism, but exceeded what is necessary of us to not only meet that role, but to be in a space where we are creating a legacy for others to be in that space as well.
Wow, that's a lot. We know it. I know it as a Black woman that, we have this desire to overachieve, to overaccomplish, and not always realizing that it is self-perpetuating these then other cycles of issues that we are embracing. Let's talk a little bit about the causes, though, of this wanting to feel superhuman, or this feeling like we haven't arrived or we're not prepared for the moment. Some of the research I did talks about upbringing and what we're taught, how we're conditioned, the environment we grow up in, certainly cultural factors as well. Let's talk a little bit about that, the way that we're raised, what we're taught about who we are. I'll give you an example in my own experience. There have been times that I've achieved things, that I've won awards, or that I've advanced in my career, and I've had family members or close friends insinuate to me about how grateful I should be. That's always the thing that's been put upon me. Like, you're grateful, and also don't miss that, because it could be taken away from you quick as they gave it to you, not you earned it. They gave it to you, so it can be taken away. What about that conditioning sets us up for imposter syndrome? Dr. Collins?
Well, I'm going to keep this short because, honey, you hit some. Woo. Okay. So, and let me tell you, the conditioning also is, as a Christian, as of a loving God, and as a Christian of a Jesus from Africa, is understanding that you could be humble and modest. When I won my Emmy Awards, I wasn't even going to go to the ceremony, until some Black sisters and white sisters in the newsroom said, absolutely, you're going. Because just like the textbook definition, I was thinking about my next. I was like, okay, because what happens with high achieving performers, you're so used to achieving and not really seeing it. You don't relish and reward yourself. And so you have to be around that tribe. But I also want to touch on base. When you talk about the conditioning, I want to talk on the conditioning of my two sisters here and empower them in a beautiful, loving way. When we say, when sometimes we say we feel like we're a fraud, I say switch that to they make you feel like you're a fraud. That's one. And because a lot of times when we internalize it, it starts to hurt us, and we start to solve a problem that we didn't create. And so it's the mindset. And then when you say, I tell any woman, because I deal with gender equity, any woman who works just as hard, if not harder. Black people, we do it all the time. You got to be just as good, if not better. And I'm like this. If you work twice as hard, make sure you get twice the pay. If you're going to do this, because we have to find ways of knowing our value. And if it is not there and people don't value you, know that it's another form of being on the plantation. It's another form of slavery. You need to get your manumission papers. You need to get up and out. But there is a conditioning that I had to learn for myself. I had to learn a different way of understanding God's love. I had to learn a different understanding of God's empowerment. Where God said, look how I created you. When I would be upset, because they would look at me as, oh, we need somebody who can fit these two areas. And it just so happens I came in with 7. So instead of looking at that as great, it's like, push, 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 push. You're nothing. You're nothing. It's just like, we come over, Africans came over having 16 languages pushed down to one. And it wasn't even ours. And so it's that push, push, push says you're not valuable unless you do these two things that we understand. It's not that, oh, you're at this level. So they start to make you feel a certain way. And I remember thinking, wow, like, am I not doing something right? Is that what, should I be doing less? Do you want me to be less? And then,
Yes.
yeah. And then God, I prayed about it because knowing a loving God for me, all things for my good, I had to take off my glasses for my own understanding. I had to put on the glasses of God and say, but look what you and I have done together. You're not just those two, you're seven. You're not just, so look at those people cannot assess you because they're not there. And so that kind of gave me an internal healing where I'm like, okay, it's not me. It's not, no one's perfect, but, I don't believe in perfection, but I do believe in perfect effort. I've seen it. I've seen some people that just know how to do what they know how to do well. There's no other explanation. They're just meant for it. And it's absolutely brilliant. But the conditioning happens in society where the in-group, out-group, textbook sociology. So I have a sociology, psychology underling for this. It's psychological. And so when those things happen, that conditioning is happening psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, all of those things that are talked about. And to me, habits have to be broken. It takes 3 months to break a habit. And if you're in the habit of putting yourself down to make other people feel better, that's a habit that needs to be broken without being arrogant, confident. That's a habit that has to be broken. I think there's a training to go through for 3 months. Break that habit. Affirmation, break that habit. So the conditioning is real. And I'm looking at this, I'll say this. Women are super. They are absolutely super. I don't allow them to take anything away from that. I always tell women, every woman should know how to play chess, right? I have a workshop called Stepping into Your Queendom. When you realize that you raise the children, feed the children, clothe the children, go to school, nothing against men. But what that also means when you play chess, the most powerful piece on that chess set is that queen. And that queen protects everyone, including specifically the king. So I tell them, queen, as you're doing all this wonderful super stuff that nobody else is going to do, make sure you get a king if that's what you want. That's your choice. Make sure you get a king who understands that and who will protect you in return. Make sure you get a king who's worth protecting, who's not going to put you down and say that you make me feel less of a man because you're the queen that you are. See, what we lost in African American culture that they still have in African countries and down in the South is they used to, when a woman was brought up, for instance, if they're of the Mende tribe, okay, because I think DNA and roots, it means something, they're known to be born leaders automatically. And that means just like in the South, your parents are going to look at that suitor and say, who are you? You have to have your own confidence, king. You have to do your own thing, king, so you don't push my daughter down.
Oh,
And so
wow.
we have this influx of Black women not only getting it from the white race, not all the way white race. I'm talking about racist, oppressive white individuals and groups and systems. They're getting it from Black people. They're getting from Black men who say women are trying to be men because they work and they do this and they do that. Absolutely not. That means you're just not the king that queen needs to be with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the conditioning comes from knowing your self-value and having the courage to speak your truth, but also having the protection. A lot of people who speak their truth do not have protection and they're
Absolutely.
left alone. So I'm gonna leave that up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amber, any thoughts?
I'm taking this in. Like, I feel like I'm an audience member because I'm also learning so much. And right there goes that imposter syndrome setting in, like, Amber, focus. I think that what you were saying, I was very much so resonating with it, right? And especially from a historical context. And going back to the initial question, Chrissy, you were saying, what are some of the causes of imposter syndrome? And I, on top of a historical lens and a cultural lens, I also think that it is environmental. Environmental being who you surround yourself by, right? So if I say this all day long, like I am a native Californian. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. And when I moved to Baltimore in 2017, the culture was very different, not good or bad, just very different, right? And I had to be very intentional about who I surrounded myself by and who I surrounded myself with inside and outside the classroom, because 12 hours a day I was with 12-year-olds, that I was able to not only uplift myself, but again, going back to this idea of uplifting others. And some things that I think are pertinent to how one navigates imposter syndrome and cultivates that healthy mental space is being able to talk to yourself like you are a queen, going back to the queendom, right? Being able to talk to yourself and love yourself. Like those self-care days are not a joke, y'all. You got to take them all. And being able to when you wake up in the morning, for example, I have affirmations all over my house. So being able to see, I am this successful, I am able to have this contract or this email or have lunch with this person, right? And as you were saying, Dr. Collins, I too am a very faith-based person. So also just praying in that space of when you feel it mustering up, right? And being able to find center and return back to the GPS. So I come from a household where we're all overachievers. My brothers went to Ivy Leagues and I'm sitting here and I went to a UC. Going to a UC is not a bad thing. Like that's a very hard thing to do, right? But it's not an Ivy. So I'm sitting here kind of like, okay, well, these folks are putting all of this expectation on me. In all actuality, I was putting that expectation on myself. Like nobody expected me to go to an Ivy. If I went, I went. If I didn't, I didn't. But I didn't want to go that far away from home. So I ended up going to a UC, which was not super far away, but it was still far enough away for me to grow into my own womanhood. But this whole time, I'm putting this perception and this expectation on myself that wasn't something that everyone else had of me, right? And those conversations that didn't happen, but might have been more successful if they happened around, well, what are those true expectations? Like, am I making this up? I am proud of you. Being able to communicate that love and affection that also sometimes lacks in households. So I
Yes.
say all this to say,
Yeah.
to be able to create space, create environmental space, and being able to have those perceptions, because whatever those other folks are going through, they might have all of the successes in the world, but you don't know what they went through to get there. You don't know how many mental breakdowns they had to get to that point, and you're putting this same pressure on yourself when all actuality they probably would have been like, nah, sis, like chill, it's not like you don't want this over here.
No, that's a thing. And as we start to transition into talking about lived experience, I want to invite those who are viewing to come into the chat, share your lived experience so that we can reflect and include you in the conversation as well. And I'll share a little bit and then we'll go to Jessica with your lived experience. But I will say that, whether it's self-imposed or whether it's being put upon me, I do feel like I am someone who probably continually experiences imposter syndrome. Having built a career in predominantly white spaces, one thing I will tell myself and I'll tell other people about myself is that, I know I'm the most knowledgeable person in the room. I know I'm the most skilled and talented person in the room. However, as much as I say that and put that forward, I don't know that I always intrinsically really, really believe that. I will say also with my lived experience that I have friend groups, I have sister friends and people who have been in my life who've navigated with me. And I think as I reflect on that, and we all maybe measure success differently, but as I measured career success, I typically was the most successful in the group. And then when I got into my current role and started being in rooms of people who were as or more accomplished career-wise than I am, that's when the imposter syndrome set in. I can remember calling Jessica in February, and I went to a Black History Month presentation at a local museum. Now, here I am supposed to be Miss Black Charities over here. And I called Jessica, I don't know if you remember this, after the event, and I was like, oh my God, the governor was in the room and the mayor was in the room. And I sat next to the city council. And I remember that conversation. And you were like, girl, you're supposed to be in the room too. And I was like, I am, and so you don't know that people actually deal with that. And today I feel a little bit differently, right? Like I've walked into who I'm supposed to be at this time and all of those kind of things. I'm still working on that. But I do think a lot of that for me is based on cultural implications, upbringing, as you mentioned, having a Christian base and feeling like humility is the antithesis to ego, and navigating all those things not so well. So that's my lived experience. I've had a lot of it. I'm still dealing with it. Y'all pray for me, and we'll turn over to Jessica.
I'm right there with you. Yeah, I would say my lived experience, it's really different. As I'm someone who, again, I had mentioned in the beginning, I grew up in a majority white spaces. And so there was always that. It was always this need to feel like I needed to separate myself from the stereotypical Black person. And so doing all that I could to just set myself apart, but also finding myself dimming my light around my white counterparts as well. And that is just something that I really struggled. And that would be like, in those early years in high school. But I think that a lot of my imposter syndrome also stems from somewhat regret. So just quickly transparency. I am a new graduate of college, right? I attended school, went to Bible college in Ohio for a few years, and I went to Morgan and studied music, and it kind of got caught up in the scene, right? Like got busy performing and just not doing what I should do. And so I left school. And so in 2023, after being married, after buying a house, becoming a mother, I decided to go back to school and finish my degree. And there's more to come. Like I didn't really want to celebrate either because I'm like, this should have been happened. I didn't want to take the time to like smell the roses and be excited for that moment in time. And so that has always plagued me. The wonderful thing about who I am as a person is I've always been really resourceful. So even though it took me that long to complete my degree, I've had decent career success, right? I was a teacher. I was a teaching artist in school in Baltimore City schools for a while. I got into the nonprofit space and grew. My career just kind of took off after that. And so all along, until that moment of me walking across the stage, I was feeling like, oh my God, like I don't know how I got here. I got here because I'm smart. I got here because I'm wise. I got here because I worked hard. And so regardless of what anyone has ever said in the past, I had to take a moment and really own that. And it took until that moment for me to really, really own that to move forward. So I was always feeling kind of like an imposter, always waiting for the gig to be up, right? And so I think a lot of that conditioning, as you guys said, like I mentioned, I went to Bible college and humility was a huge thing. Like we were like the skirt wearing, very quiet, very meek and mild women were a certain way. That's not how I was raised, but that was kind of, the culture that I put myself in. And so to be boastful and to, I was a great singer and a performer, but like very, very humble, almost too humble, where I even missed out on opportunities because I dimmed my light because I was trying to be humble. And, I felt like I didn't really deserve to be where I was. But all along, God has kind of taken me through this journey. So this imposter syndrome is really, really interesting to navigate. I mean, I have these conversations with friends and family who are in the workplace, especially in navigating these majority white spaces. And, just at the end of the day, you got where you got because God put you there for a reason, right? And he's not going to put you in a place that you're going to just completely, you know, fail at. He's going to equip you with the tools to be able to navigate that time in your life, that space, that occupation, that opportunity.
Thank you. So we have some people in the chat who say they ain't got no imposter syndrome. They have grounded sense of self. They are doing I love me statements. They have got it. So y'all go ahead with that. We appreciate you all sharing. And we'll turn over to Amber. Amber, tell us a little bit about your experience with imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. I think that I can echo Dr. Collins and Jessica's sentiments when I say I also grew up in PWIs, and I'm recognizing a pattern that imposter syndrome among Black women is exacerbated when they are raised in PWIs. I think there could be a possibility of different reasons, right? Going back to that expectation of resources that come with, oh, I want this, or I want that, or I need to work with this, or like this person, like I'm just going to use California, for example, because that's home, that California is notorious for wealth. Right. And so growing up and going to private schools, because my mom was not having it. She's like, around the corner, no, ma'am. So we had these experiences where it was, I wanted this, or I achieved this. And I often felt like I was only achieving it because they needed a quota, or because it was a element of tokenization, right? Like I didn't feel like I actually earned it, or I actually deserved it, or anything of that sort. I remember when I got into Hopkins, like even saying that I graduated from Hopkins kind of a while, like a few years ago, a while ago. And even saying like I went to Hopkins, sometimes people look at you like, you went where? Or even me saying that out loud, that I went to Hopkins, like I went through the program, I graduated, it's been like 3 years and I'm still like, it still hasn't processed, right? And so I feel like those comparisons is what becomes an internalization. In order for us not to have those internalizations, it has to be you against you, right? Like it can't be you against everyone else, or you versus someone else. And those lived experiences for me were constant, because I was always looked at with that eyebrow arch of you did what, or that smirk of, oh, you didn't do that, did you get help? And I remember when I was in middle school, right? Middle school is my base. I had an A in math, and I looked at that and I was like, who did that? Like, and I remember the teacher called me in and he looked me in the face and called my mom down to the school and everything, and was accusing me of cheating. And I was like, I don't even have time. Like, I don't have the time to cheat. My mother would kill me. So I had all of these internalized elements from a very young age. And now navigating space in Black Baltimore, navigating space with people that are more advanced in their careers, I still feel that little voice in the back of my head. And I will elaborate on the I love you files too. It's putting in use like a Google Drive or Google Doc. Sometimes you can write them down, but once a week, putting something in your I love you file that you accomplished. It could be something small, it could be something big. And it also is a wonderful data tracker if you are a clientele based business, of the growth that you have seen over a course of X amount of days or months, or however often you go back and reflect upon it.
I definitely, and we'll go to Dr. Collins, but I definitely believe what you said early on about having experiences in PWIs does contribute to this. I will say also, having grown up at, attending schools that were predominantly white, no space was made for me. And so where we talk about isolation, and that's why I do have opinions even now about how we put our little Black children into these high-end private schools where they don't have representation and no space is made for them psychologically. And so no space was made for me in those settings until I had the courage, the empowerment to start to make space for myself. And then of course you become angry and combative and problematic and all those things. But I remember one of my first school memories is the children telling me that I could not drink white milk at lunch, that I had to drink chocolate milk. And so when those kind of things happen to you, you automatically feel like you don't belong. You're not supposed to be there. You're not included. And so I do think that all of those things, including having pressure to overcompensate, having self-doubt, having a fear of speaking up, isolation, and then dealing with stereotypes and microaggressions all contribute to having imposter syndrome, probably at very early ages, that we then as adults bring into the workplace. And I think all of that kind of goes together with that. But Dr. Collins, I'd love to hear your lived experience.
Yeah, and wow, these are really great. When I hear it, just it's bothersome, but it's also empowering because it gives me more things to pray about for each of you, and everyone else is going through that. I have to say that, being a military brat, I moved around a lot for the first 14 years of my life, and I was always at predominantly white schools, and I never felt not included. Never felt it. Because in the military and in sports, you're going to take the best player to win.
What? Yeah.
In the military, we're all one American protecting the country. So that conditioning was on me where, my best friends were white, all my friends were white, but it was, if race came up, it was something that did not come up daily, right? It's like having a best friend in 5th grade, and he lived across the street, and he would always come to my window and make sure I was okay. And we touch our fingertips he's like, okay, good night. And it was just a sweetheart, young children love, innocent. And I remember being in the military. I moved almost every year for the first 14 years of my life. So I had to adapt very quickly. I don't mind that at all. It was wonderful. But I remember one day you'll come home and they're moving. You have no idea, your best friend's moving. And I remember he came to my window and he was crying. And I said, why are you crying? Just write me a letter. And he said, I can't write you a letter because I love you, but I can't be your friend anymore. And I said, why not? He says, because you're in. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And I'm like, where does that even come from? It comes from parents. It's conditioned. And already a child, that innocent, is being taught the imposter syndrome by seeing Black, brown, whatever children differently and saying that you just don't belong. So at a very young age, I learned to forgive. God has allowed me, instead of looking back on my life and seeing all of the things that I've been challenged a lot, because when much has been given, much will be asked. And so I'm challenged daily, but it has not changed me as a person. I've learned that, I won my first award when I was in 1st grade, and I still have it to this day. God has made me a different type of person only so that I can win, but I'm also down here because of my humanitarian heart. I love everyone. Everyone I love everyone, has value. So therefore I go through the hurt and pain, even if I didn't experience it. So personally, but I experience in different ways when I'm working, for instance, in Chicago, and I talk about this and I talk about that. And they say, well, you got a different hustle. And I'm like, yeah, but I work 7 days a week, and I stop working on Sundays just for myself and to worship. But one individual said, until you've had sugar sandwiches, you don't know what hustle is. And I said, what is a sugar sandwich? But it's because I think that is a healthy form of humility and humbleness. In order to do God's will, I have to less of me and more of God. So some things I don't understand, but what it did was, because I had gone through, my family on the Black side were, when people say, you talk white, I didn't even understand that, because everyone I was around in my family spoke the same exact way. So I never gave validation to that, because it did not resonate with me. At the same time, I did not see, and not dispelling, everybody has a different experience is what I'm getting to. And the fact that, because I did not have that experience, and my father was a retired lieutenant colonel, which means in the Army, your rank, you're not going to treat me any kind of way because of my father's rank. You're not going to treat me. And so what that did was it kind of it protected me, right? So what happened was, once we moved from the confines of the military, then I had to deal with a whole different type of hate. I did not have the coping skills. I would cry all the time. And then I learned, well, I'm not anything unless you're something. I became codependent. I don't want to win unless you win. And so, because that indoctrination says you have to take that player and make them feel better about themselves in order for you to be okay. So, and I want to say that what I learned is a process. What I learned is that that's fine. I'd rather do it in the way that we do sports. You can practice like, my boy Kobe Bryant. He didn't wait for practice. He practiced on his own. Get better if you want to. Other people, you have to give them opportunity to get through that. But it was very, very difficult. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned, when you go through what I went through, being so hard on myself. I mean, because especially when you hit it every time, you had to learn how not to hit it and be all right. When you hit it every time, you had to learn that God's still going to love you because you're not perfect. He never even said he wanted you to be perfect. Where did you get that from? So you do that self-reflection and say, well, where did I get that from? And you start to realize you got it conditioned, right? You got it true from different people, family structures, in relationships. One of the things that I learned, I would be so hard on myself. No one could be harder on me than me. No one. And so what I realized when I changed my prayer, and I just didn't like it, just doesn't feel right. It just didn't feel healthy. What I realized is one of the reasons why I allow myself to be in toxic situations, and I had to stop that, was because there was nothing more toxic than self-abuse. Nothing. No one can say anything to me or hurt me more than I hurt myself. So if I sit there and say, Janice, why did you do that? You know you should have made this grade. You know you could have done better. Why would you do? If I'm doing that to myself, it does nothing to me if you say something to me. And so I said, Janice, you just condition yourself to be in an abusive, toxic situation, whether it's work or whatever the case may be. So when you realize and you stop that, that has a domino effect to stopping everything else. And that's why I said, you take off those glasses and even the lens of blackness. I have wonderful friends in Chicago. It's black. Okay. South side, west side is black. And what I mean by that, I have friends where I'm like, we would drive in a car and somebody would cut them off. They said, they did that because I was black. I'm like, really? Everything was about this imposter where everything is. So they have a different lens where they've been in predominantly Black communities where that happens so often that they condition themselves where they don't understand that not everybody's like that.
Yes.
And it really is not everyone who looks like you is your friend.
Yes.
Not everyone who doesn't look like you is your enemy. So they had to go through that. So it was, I call it growing pains. It was painful. Sometimes I'd call my friends. I felt like, God, what am I, I'm just trying to, set people free and do the best. And, I'm such a giving, I'm a person of service. I'm not going to go around and say, boo, boo, boo. I've learned how to kind of toot my own horn a little bit, but it's like, I go around that. And then it was like, when all of that happens and you look, I had to take off those glasses and say, you know what, I just want to do my purpose and what I'm here for. I want to, and I learn from others. So I go in when I'm not the best. When I was in Shenzhen, China for Unleashed 2019, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Liberia, she was talking about the imposter syndrome and what she had said. Her name is Lima Gaboe from Liberia. She said, I want all the Black sisters to understand when you go into a room and you understand why you're there, that not everybody's going to be there. And if you are even just the only one, you've chosen. So instead of looking at it and letting these people get to you, sometimes you have to branch out and step in. She says, and I don't want you to step in to a room quietly and say, oh my goodness, do I belong? She said, I want you to step in there with boldness, because God could have chosen anyone, but he chose you to be the only one to step in there. And so, I look at those things. And so I say things like, I'm just going to continue to let my light shine. If it's too bright, people need to put on sunglasses, because I'm going to continue to make the world a better place for everybody to live in. And I think that we need more self-healing affirmations. You have to know yourself, trick yourself, right? My living experience, I had to, being who we are, high performers, I had to find a way to fix this problem. So what I would do is, I knew the first thing I do, wake up, I pray, and I look at the ceiling, and then everybody looks left to right usually, and I make my way. By the time I look at the ceiling, I see my first line of affirmation. When I look to the left, I see another. I just wrote on a piece of paper, another affirmation. I would say every single one of them until I got to the bathroom. I'd look at that one right above the bathroom before I take my shower, and another affirmation. You can do this. God got you. And by the time, you couldn't tell me I wasn't ready. But knowing that each time I would say, God, I feel like I'm being beat up all the time. And it hurts. It hurts. What did I say? I feel like I have to rope a dope all the time, like Muhammad Ali. And my friend said, well, rope a dope then. Well, rope a dope.
It's a perpetual fight. So we're going to go back to some of those tips and leave the viewers tonight with some guidance on how they can also take steps to heal and to kind of come out of some of this. I want to lift up one of the comments. It says that this individual's imposter syndrome shows up as a fear of making mistakes. And it acknowledges that white male counterparts can kind of make a mistake and laugh it off. Whereas as a Black woman, her errors are counted against her as she doesn't belong here, or she can't handle it, or was not prepared. And I would even lift it further to say that many times when Black professionals make mistakes for whatever reason, they represent the entire Black race, right? We carry the burden, that Black tax of representing all Black people. So I just wanted to lift that up as well. Really quickly, let's talk about some of the emotional, and Dr. Collins, you talked about a few of them, some of the emotional and social effects that imposter syndrome has on us when we're not freed from it, right? When we're not released from it. It looks at reduced self-confidence, negative self-thought, self-perception, fear of failure. We talked about perfectionism, also strained interactions with other people. You may struggle to voice your opinions or to engage fully. That means you're not showing up as your best self because you're concerned about whether you're being accepted and how other people are experiencing you. We talk about stress and burnout. I know Amber spoke on that. And then lastly, which I think is really important, this decreased satisfaction and fulfillment. Like, how do you go through life carrying this burden and not overcoming it? Because ultimately it will result in a decreased sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. And you really won't be able to do what you were placed on earth to do without a whole lot of burden. So Amber, what do you think about that?
I was most inclined to talk about stress.
Okay.
When I was listening to all of the bullet points that you were just going down, like the first thing I said was stress, and you did say it in your list, but burnout and stress are probably the biggest elements of impact for me when I talk about imposter syndrome, right? Because your brain is constantly going, you're constantly thinking like, how can I get better? What do I have to do? What are the next steps, right? You're not enjoying the journey. You're constantly focused on the destination. You're constantly constantly thinking about perception, you're constantly thinking about your internalizations, right? And that is very draining. And I believe, Chrissy, I believe you said this. I don't want to quote you incorrectly, so correct me if I'm not quoting you correctly, but we were talking about how there is a physiological and physical impact on a person's body when they are overly stressed, right? Like that's when it turns into heart disease. That's when it turns into like different types of eczema. That's when it turns into cataracts. That's when it turns into all of these different ACEs, right? Because ACEs are studies that are primarily done on young people, but the adverse, and I'm blanking out on what the ACEs stands for, but the ACEs are also very much so pertinent to adults. And
I'll
so
just stop you and tell you real quick. I had an ulcer by the time I was 12 years old from stress and that overachieving and feeling out of place and all that. But go ahead. We'll go back to
and
that.
so in conclusion, I say this all to say that the impact of a person's body, especially a woman's body, because if you really think about us from a historical standpoint, we use our body more laboriously, right? Like a man can't give birth. And when you have the necessity for your body to be healthy, when you have the necessity for your brain to be healthy, for you to be able to have all of these multifaceted hats, and you are stressed because you yourself are putting this pressure on yourself or thinking that you are not good enough, then that is when the impact trickles down. And I had noted something that Dr. Collins had said around navigating imposter syndrome, right? Like leaning on prayer and looking at affirmations and identifying the elements that we are good at. Because at the end of the day, imposter syndrome exists within a system that is working the way that it was designed to work.
Jessica, what are your thoughts about emotional and social effects and, you know, how it leaves the Black person and specifically the Black professional, you know, the outcomes of kind of walking and not overcoming imposter syndrome?
Sure. So I feel like I can speak for myself in saying that it almost like compounds or it's a snowball effect. So I'm having these feelings of inadequacy at work that is spilling over into how I feel about myself in general, not just how I feel about the work that I'm doing, but am I beautiful enough? Am I smart enough? It compounds and it kind of snowballs into even, I would say, lots of anxiety, being on edge, being stressed out. For me, I feel like eating, not participating in healthy activities and drinking, and just because you're just so anxious, this one part of your life is not quite figured out. You're feeling inadequate in this one season or part of your life. It just spills over to every aspect. And then I feel like I've failed at other things that I know that I'm good at, that I'm great at, that I'm like, that's a drop in the hat. Like I can do that because I felt like an imposter at work. It's kind of spilled over into the things that I know that I'm really great at doing. And then that becomes, a sense of like, tend to get a sense of inadequacy around that. And then I just can't do anything right. But that anxiety and that stress, that is what really, really tends to get me. And that's what I see in a lot of others that I speak, getting to the point where you don't want to go to work anymore. You're me, like I get stressed out, I make a mistake at work, I feel inadequate. I'm on Indeed, like, okay, maybe I could maybe I should find a different career because I don't think I have what it takes. Maybe I should look at it. Should I move a step down because I'm not quite up to par where, I'm not performing where I'd like to perform in this position now. So it just compounds and then it just completely gets out of control and kind of snowballs. And so it takes a lot to break from that cycle. It takes a lot.
And I really like something that was lifted in the chat, and I think it's so important. It asked us to consider that the ways that we start to process what success is, right? And how we measure our own success and our own, I think
Absolutely.
achievement starts to color, as you said, how we look at success in a number of different areas, but even worse, it could possibly lead to how we talk to and what we put upon other people. And I agree with something Dr. Collins said. If we're our own worst enemy, then how can we possibly stand to mentor and sponsor other people? Right? If I can't give the forgiveness to myself, or the leeway to myself, or the love to myself, then what am I perpetuating as I interact with and perhaps stand in authority over other people, right? It starts to spread toxicity. Dr. Collins, your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a great that's a great segue into that. On the other side of that, that's the one thing we know how to do: support other people. We support other people, we protect other people, we speak up to other people, we encourage other people, but then you start feeling like a fraud yourself because you don't do it for yourself. That's when you start feeling like a fraud, because it's like, how in the world, years ago when I started doing the Queendom workshops, before I did that, I said, Janice, you have got to get yourself together, because you have got to practice what you preach. But who pays attention? A lot of times, who's taking care of you? If you're not taking care of yourself, you have to look at who's taking care of you. Do you have a tribe? Do you have people that check in on you? Do you have other people? Because a lot of times, women, especially who are really performing at high levels, they do a lot of self-care. And when they don't do self-care, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so so that's one thing that we do is really crazy. So years ago, I said, I started going back to what I had learned before I was influenced by other things and thinking, oh, well, maybe I should do it this way, not knowing myself, feeling bad, or like, oh, I don't want to be the smartest or whatever. As a child, you go through that. And even as an adult. So I think that what's really important, I think, in this conversation, and why I love the fact that you're having this conversation, and I love what my sisters have said, is because however we're going to do it, we have to do it to save our lives. Literally. Stress will hurt you. Depression will hurt you. Not eating right, not building up the endorphins, taking a walk will hurt you. So what I'm saying, and what I'm saying to everyone who's out there listening, to myself or whatever, you are already a winner because you're here. You're already a winner, and you're strong because you get up every day and go to a job and work a job, whether you want to be there or not, whether you should be there or not, you're doing that, but you do it. So you have the fortitude, the endurance. We just need to redirect certain things. So I'm looking at that, and I say, what I do with my emotional, because I'm a very emotional person. I'm an empath. I feel the emotions of other people. So I pray a lot for other people, and I had to learn how to self-care, because for me, God is my number one employer with all benefits. Even if I'm working for someone else, I listen and pray to do right, to do loving things from God. But also God has taught me, and learning with Pastor Hannah in Chicago and that sort of thing, that God didn't mean for us to just be abused. He didn't mean for us not to fight back. A long time ago, I had to go back and say, God, I used to call myself a lioness. I used to say, I used to love, I wanted to love myself again. What is loving myself? What does that look like? I'm confident. I'm a nice person. I love everyone, but I'm confident. If you would have, it's not just sports. You want to play me some sports? Let's go. I love being confident, even if I lose. It just makes me feel good because it's authentic. I'm like, come on, let's do this. And so I take that on in life. I think you have to celebrate not only your successes, you have to celebrate you. What I would do is, I don't know my voice over voicemail or whatever, so I would leave myself messages. And I would say, Janice, you did it today, girl. Girl, you went in there and you did it. You didn't let them. And so because of that, it would resonate with me, because I'm listening and it's a different voice. Oh, that made me feel so good. You work out, confident. I tell my sisters and brothers and anybody, don't suffer in silence. The fact that you created this platform that we don't have to suffer in silence. You created this safe space that we don't have to suffer in silence. It's a part of healing. So I declare that this is healing and repair, and to know that people out there, you're not alone. We have to understand the syndrome is a form of bullying and hazing.
Mm.
We have to understand that that's what's going on. So therefore, you need to put that onus on them. I don't want anybody to just take this. We have to deal with this, but it is not yours. Every time women, we have emotional intelligence. We have high marks in that. So what happens? We take that we take all of that. All of a sudden, we try to fix it. Some things they need to fix. You need to call it out and say what you did was wrong. And sometimes I think if it's a toxic environment, get out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just jump ship. But if it's not loving, it's not nurturing, it's not supporting to you. And I ask people, and I'm not saying it's easy. I ask people, I said, just ask yourself, whether you're in a relationship or work relationship, is it worth your life? If it is not worth your life, then you're going to come up with an escape plan like Alcatraz and get out. And if you need help, we're gonna make sure you get out, but be authentic, and understand that, especially for faith-based, they don't have jurisdiction over you. The moment you are what you believe and what you think, the moment you think they do is the moment they have power over you.
Yes.
And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that that I haven't fallen victim to it. But hey, I've been knocked down, but you know what? I'm looking at you guys. I look at people every day, and they get up every single day. And you need to celebrate that every single day. I don't want any slave stuff where it says, well, we were on the fields and it was hot, and they suffered, we're going to have to suffer that much. No, that's not what God wants. He wants you to be prosperous and happy, and have that as your vision. And then by that, you'll make your decisions. You'll make decisions and navigate that way. And Chrissy, I would say, anytime you're ready, girlfriend, with as powerful as you are and the great work that you're doing, I watch every podcast that you have because it's so empowering. You're speaking for people who don't have a voice or people are not listening. I'd be more than happy to join with you and come together and do a step into your queendom workshop to
Let's
have
do
some
it.
people come in and do this. So I just want to applaud my sisters here and in the chat box. I just want to applaud my sisters and my brothers who understand. I've been surrounded by good men who are very empowering and very protective and loving and never diminished me, not once. And I want to give to the brothers of all types and all dimensions. I want to give them their props too. So I just thank you for allowing me to heal and help me repair some of the healing of the woundedness that goes on.
So as
In our life.
we trickle down to the close tonight, that's exactly what we want to do collectively, is have a little bit more discussion in an attempt to leave our viewers and those who watch the playback with some real tools, tips, resources, and guidance to not only navigate imposter syndrome, because I think that's what we started to talk about, but what we're really talking about is being delivered from imposter syndrome, released from it, which is a whole different, right? Liberated from it. And so I'm going to go over a couple of tips that I've come up with and ask each of you maybe to embellish a little bit on what you think it is. One of the things that it says is in order to, navigate, overcome imposter syndrome, you really need to seek support and mentorship. It says to connect with mentors or trusted colleagues who can offer guidance, support, and perspective. They can provide reassurance and advice when feelings of self-doubt arise. And Jessica, I'm going to ask you to take that one on. What do you think?
Absolutely agree with that one. I think even with you, like, there are moments in time where I'm feeling just like I don't belong, like this is not for me. But like just having sounding board, someone who knows you, but beyond knows you, they can see the potential in you, and speaking with them and kind of, like, you have helped me. My mother's another one, kind of been that North Star to kind of remind me like whose I am and who I am, and also where I've come from, right? When you take self-inventory and you look back over your life, you can say, you think things over, you really can see, that you've been blessed, and all of this has really truly been building a testimony for who you are today. And so I think it's easy to get caught up in that moment of feeling just worthless, inadequate, and all of that. But like really, reaching out to that mentor and getting guidance, and even getting, reaching back to those people who you find safety in, and they help you ground yourself and remember who you are, and again, your journey.
Okay. And one of the other things it gives a tip on is setting realistic standards for yourself. And Amber, I'm going to ask you to take this one. It says, avoid setting excessively high standards for yourself. That sounds like blasphemy to me. And I know that's because I've been conditioned to think that. It says, understanding that perfection is not a realistic or healthy expectation. Set achievable goals and then be kind to yourself when you fall short. I think that is extremely difficult. I'd love to hear your insight.
I'm laughing because it definitely sounds blasphemous, but it is very healthy once it's achieved. It takes a lot of self-awareness, and I always go back to this necessity for coaching, right? Like, not only am I a duly certified coach, but I also have a coach, right? It's like being a doctor and not ever seeing a doctor. It doesn't make sense. So the purpose of coaching is, by no means am I a mental health professional, right? And they say there's three realms. There's therapy, coaching, and consulting, right? Consulting is when someone comes in and they tell you what to do. They probably have a strategy to get you from point A to point B. And therapy is looking at your past and your relationships and how that impacts the future and your decision making. And coaching is setting a goal and becoming self-aware within yourself and your environment to achieve those goals. Now, being able to set expectations and goals that are realistic requires a large amount of self-awareness, because we are conditioned, which seems to be the key word of the night, conditioned to bite off more than we can chew. And for me personally, I like writing lists, and I like writing details under each date and time. And I have a huge calendar, and how I bite off a small amount is I give myself 2 tasks, right? No matter if I think that I can jam 5 tasks into that day, or I have fallen behind in tasks, I give myself 2 tasks a day, and I complete those tasks. And I make sure I write it down and check it off, because you also release endorphins when you have the ability, or when you see something being checked off of your list, right? And so not only being able to create those lists in a timely manner, but making sure that it's aligned with your goals. Because if you say, oh, I'm going grocery shopping on Thursday, and you know that you don't have time to go grocery shopping on Thursday, it's not a realistic goal, right? And I know for me, grocery shopping is my favorite chore. If anybody ever needs to know that, Amber, fun fact. And that's something that I know is going to probably take me like 2 to 3 hours as I walk up and down the aisles, right? So if I say, okay, I have to go grocery shopping, and then I have to hit this meeting at 6:30, and I only gave myself an hour, that's not realistic. And that's where that self-awareness comes in, and being able to work with a coach to be able to identify that self-awareness, be able to identify your patterns, being able to identify your strategy for self, to be able to get you and your business into more productive grounds and higher revenue is always the goal as well.
Thank you. So there is a request from the viewers for those who are willing or would like to drop your contact information into the chat, as people would like to stay connected. I'm going to go to Dr. Collins on this one, and then I'm going to give you guys a heads up. We're going to land on self-care. So we'll go back and land there. But Dr. Collins, I'm actually going to ask you to give insight on a word you've used a lot tonight, which is value. So this tip says, one way to combat imposter syndrome is to focus on your strengths and contributions, concentrate on your strengths and the unique perspective and contributions you bring to the workplace, to the table, and to remind yourself of the value you provide. So can you give some insight on that one?
Yes, I can. First of all, I love being inclusive. I'm a collaborator, as strong of a leader as I am. And as a woman, I have maternal instincts. I protect everyone. And I'm courageous, I'm brave, and I love that about myself. And I love working with individuals who, even the ones that you don't think need protection, I'm looking at them with my third eye and I'm looking at what they're doing. And that I use my God-given gifts to make sure everybody's good, everybody's heard, and everybody's good. Because even with it comes to bullies, I look at them as victims. I find out where did that come from, and so they can heal and repair. What I bring is my authentic self without apology, and the more I do it, I just came from Wake Forest University for a special induction for the first two Black female student athletes at Wake Forest. And they were my teammates and they were inducted into the Trailblazers. And what I found being around all the women from 80 some years old to the new athletes, these women are not afraid of anything. I felt empowered just being there. Like I wasn't going to go there and just, oh, this is what they did to me, because they wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow it. So my authentic self comes from sports, comes from collaboration, comes from leadership. And I think, when you talk about coming in as you are, I will say that when my sister, Jessica, said something about finding mentors, I say mentors, you need to find them. One of the hardest things to do when you're going through is then try to find mentors. And, I think people, when they reach out for that, and get that cheerleading squad. I got a cheerleading squad. When I call them out, I say I'm running for president. They're like, sign me up. I'm like, okay, you want that? And acing it, I use a lot of what was the other word you said I use all the time?
Value. That everyone has
Value.
value.
Yeah. So that's my value. That's 18 years of my hard work. That's value, knowing who you are and knowing who you are authentically, which means there's cross-cultural competency. You are not your circumstances, but your circumstances got you here, which means that you can survive and do even better. But you have to think it first. You have to know it first. And if you don't know it, that's right. Call a Chrissy, call a Janice or whatever, because sometimes we just need to be lifted up. We just need to be held up, and it's like, so it's that value. I'm like, okay, Janice, what's your value? I love everyone, but I'm not afraid of growing pains. I'm not afraid of growing pains. So you can come. I'm going to endure. You can come for me, but I'm going to endure.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because of me, because my people endured. And not because my people endure, but their people endure. So it's rooted in me that I cannot lose. It's rooted in me that you cannot lose.
Now I just listened to you. I feel like I can't lose either.
and get those espresso shots, right? I'm developing this thing where you shake it, like, and instead of espresso, it's espresso shot.
Okay.
That keeps you going, because, it really is a mantra. Mm-hmm. When you go out there for speaking, you're nervous. You have to talk yourself into getting out on that stage. And that means every day before you go out, know your value. Those people, no matter what, they're not God. Mm-hmm. They ain't your God. So the fact is that you can have a healthy humbleness, modesty to you. But, we have to remember that God didn't say be humble to everybody when they're beating you or anything. No, stand up. Get other people, know your value. And you know what? It's not just important for you to know your value. It's to be in a place where your value can be appreciated, mm-hmm. and it can grow. And if it is not, I tell individuals, if it is not, you have to decide on how much you're going to put in. A lot of people put in a lot of percentage of their life into work, and they have very little left for themselves or family. Mm-hmm. We need to flip that. When you leave work at 5 o'clock, leave work at 5 o'clock and put it into yourself where you get your rest. You listen to your music. I have a playlist for everything because I'm a musician as well. You can't tell me, by the time I listen to Yolanda Adams or even, I'm going to say some of Megan Thee Stallion, real cool because I like her lyrics and everything. I'm like, I'm ready, Chrissy. So have that value, know your self-value, have other people who love you and who support you, and just get out there and do it. And everything that puts you down, the last thing I say, everything that happens to you, I want you to look at it like this: it's your preparation for elevation. That is it. I'm
So,
done.
well, we're gonna do a round robin as we get ready to
Oh, I'm
close,
done.
and it's gonna be all about this tip, which is, you mentioned it. All of you have mentioned it at one time or another, and it's something that, if you know me, you also know that I needed to hear and need to accept, which is about taking breaks and practicing self-care. Notoriously bad at that.
Do you take breaks, Chrissy?
No, although I had an executive coach at the beginning of the year who, we, instead of coaching me, we ended up spending our whole 6 months talking about me and this self-care thing, and her trying to I think crack that nut. And I always
Awesome.
say I'm working on it. I'm probably not working on it hard enough. And I always tell people my self-care might not look like yours, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
people are like, you need to sleep. Well, if that's not self-care for me, then that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
support me. What I found, and y'all are gonna laugh at this, and I'm not encouraging other people. I found respite at the car wash. No, just wait a minute. So the 3.6 minutes that you go into the car wash and the thing takes over your car and pushes you through, and the things, I literally, there's something about those moments that allow me to just zone out, that I don't know why. And I know that's not an extensive amount of time, right? But I started going 2 and 3 times a week because I was like, this is kind of works for me. It works for me. And if that's all I can do for right now, I can do that. For me, it
I
might not
love
be
it.
sleeping 8 hours a day or whatever the case is, like other people, but that's my thing. But let's talk about, in your final remarks, how we want to leave Black people in their overcoming of imposter syndrome through practicing self-care and looking at their well-being. Mindfulness, engaging activities that help them to recharge. Because I think too often, many of us, when these things happen that perpetuate imposter syndrome, I'm like perpetually shocked. When I'm in work environments and professional environments and somebody does something that is harmful to me or says something that's abusive to me, I ain't never ready for it. I'm shocked, not sometimes, every time. I'm like, and then later on, I'm like, this is what I should have said. This is how I should have reacted. But I think if you are recharged and on ready, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? So let's talk about this self-care and relaxing and recharging, and we'll go in the opposite order that we started today. So we'll start with Amber with your remarks.
Okay. I love the car wash. I too am a car wash person. I get like super nervous sometimes. I'm just like, oh my gosh, should I press go? Press go. Should I put my foot on the gas? And it just kind of takes you. But I think in that note too, piggybacking off of that, Chrissy, you have to find what works for you, right? And it could be it's trial and error, because you can stumble upon it. Like for me, I really enjoy taking naps, and sometimes naps really work for me, and then other days they don't, because then I'm thinking about all the things that I'm not doing when I am taking a nap, right? So just because it works for you in one given moment of your week doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in another element of your week. Something that I really enjoy doing is journaling, being able to authentically get out everything without stopping, forget the spelling errors and the grammar, or just letting it all go out. And then I just close it. Like I don't read it, I don't dwell on it, I let it out, and I release it. Another one for me, self-care, looks like prayer. And sometimes that prayer doesn't have to be a specific ask. It should just be like, what is on my heart, help me. um, and those conversations are also releasing a weight off of your shoulders, right? And lastly, I would close by saying gifting yourself, right? And that those gifts of some sort can look different, right? It can look like an investment in self, because it could be a professional development, it could be an event, because those events that adds up, those events add up. And it could look like brunch, creating a budget for yourself to be able to indulge in those networking opportunities, in those brunches, in those dinners. If you want to take yourself out on a date, I love taking myself out on a date where it's just me and Ross and Starbucks. But creating a budget, I'm not telling anybody to go broke. I'm saying to find what works for you and your budget. and finding a niche that you really enjoy.
Thank you for that.
And having something to look forward to.
Oh, I love that one. Absolutely. Dr. Collins, self-care.
Well, I'm just going to say I've talked a lot about self-care and the things that I do. So I will say the one thing that I have not mentioned that is actually so important to my emotional well-being is allowing myself to feel, allowing myself to cry, allowing myself to feel sad. I don't understand mean people to this day. I deal with them. But you're right, Chrissy. I'm never prepared for it. But because of prayer, I don't go a day without prayer and meditation, or doing something physical. But what I've had to learn how is not always be so tough and strong all the time. When I get home in my safety, I allow myself, and I write poems. One of my poems and songs was just published in a decoloniality academic journal, for Taylor and Francis Routledge. And I didn't know that was going to happen, but what I did was I allowed myself to feel. I wanted to say what was on my heart, not just for myself, but for all of the sisters who have been perished. Because in my case, academic woundedness, workplace woundedness. And I said, I don't want another person to pass away, including myself. So I'm going to let it out. I'm not going to keep that inside of me. High blood pressure,
Mm-hmm.
blood sugar levels off, cortisol, all that. I got to get it out of me. So I cry, I pray, I let myself just be. I'm human. And then I lift myself back up and do it again. So for me, that's really important for me. And I think for a lot of super women to just put the cape down, or at least hang it up for a little bit and allow yourself just to be, and you'll be good.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And
My pleasure.
So for me, a few things. One thing that I have been doing a lot more lately, as I'm teaching my toddler how to regulate his own emotions, is breath work. And so I find myself, stressed out at work, shoulders up to the ears. I feel it. I stop. I take my breaths. I do some of the activities that he does, the rainbow breaths and things of that nature. That really helps me. Self-care looks different for a lot of different people. And for me, something that I do is that I do tend to be the cheerleader for a lot of other people, and I don't cheer for myself. So I've been kind of working on being a hype man for myself. So I will actually, like, driving in the car is like my solitude. I will play music. I will speak out loud to myself. I will speak affirmations out loud to myself. There's a YouTube channel of a woman who has affirmations for Black women, and I listen to that and I repeat them out loud, and I just kind of, like, pour into myself and hype myself up, especially when I'm about to face something that I know is really stressful. And so I do a lot of those things. Retail therapy is good as well, and setting, but, like, to your point, Amber, kind of incentivizing yourself, like, all right, I'm gonna go get a pedicure this day, not routinely. I'm gonna do something a little more special this time, or I'm gonna dress up and go out to brunch with my girls on this Saturday because I've earned it, or I'm gonna treat someone out. And those are the kinds of things that I do. Those are the kinds of things that I do to kind of keep myself motivated, focused, and self-assured and grounded.
To piggyback off
Amen.
of that too, Jessica, Chrissy, if I have 30 seconds, when
Sure.
you said affirmations, I really enjoy, and I think I noted this earlier, that I really enjoy posting affirmations around my house. Like, the teacher in me has a plethora of Post-its. So being able to post them, and when I wake up in the morning, it says, like, you are worthy, you are, and there's also an app. It's owned by a Black woman, and she's also a Source, she's a Delta. And they will text affirmations to you, or the app will procure affirmations for you every day. I personally like writing them out because that is like muscle memory, but there are also apps, and I can send that to y'all if you're interested.
Thank you. And I'll just share as we close a couple of tips that I've adopted over the course of this year, because I know a lot of people who are on are people who have also followed the journey at Associated Black Charities. I tell my staff I don't sit in the back of rooms. And so when I walk into a room, and the funny thing is, I don't care how late I am, I'm looking to sit toward the front of the room. Something about positioning does that for me, to level myself with people who I hold in regard, to put myself where they are as well. And so that's something that has worked for me too. I will say that we all need to recognize and acknowledge our accomplishments. This says, take time to reflect on your accomplishments and the skills that have helped you to succeed. Acknowledge your achievements and the hard work that you've put in. Celebrate them, no matter how small. Recognize and celebrate milestones and achievements to reinforce a positive self-perception. So thank you so much for—
You are enough.
Yes, we are all enough.
You
That's
are
an
enough.
amazing mantra to end on. Thank you all for participating in this
Thank
panel.
you.
Thank you all for viewing with us tonight. I will be back for another Equity at Work this month, or I'm sorry, next month in November. We have a special teen edition on November 14th in partnership with the College Bound Foundation, where our topic will be all about code switching for teens. And we're really excited about that. And then also in November, we'll return with our regular monthly Equity at Work, where next month's topic of discussion will be social exclusion in the workplace. And so for Associated Black Charities, I'm Chrissy Thornton. Good night.